You look upset. Don't pout. It's not a big deal. That's what my daughter said when I came back from a short walk and found them all out back. My daughter, my son, their spouses, my grandchildren, grilling, laughing, holding red plastic cups under string lights. I had turned 80 that morning. Not a call, not a card, not even a slice of cake. I didn't say anything. Not then. The air smelled like lighter fluid and sweet corn. Someone had brought a speaker. Someone had brought sparklers. And I stood there on the edge of the patio like an extra in a film I no longer had a role in. "Mum, you're acting like we committed a crime," Olivia added with a laugh. "Come on, it's just a birthday. We'll do something another time, okay?" But they wouldn't. I knew that. At my age, you can smell a lie even when it's wrapped in casual laughter. They were embarrassed I was standing there, barefoot, holding a cardigan over my nightdress. I had only gone to drop off some cookies to my neighbour Alice. She was turning 87, and her daughter had flown in from Oregon with balloons and soup. I'd stayed a bit too long, I suppose. When I returned, my own family had decided I was not to be included. "Just go lie down, Mom," someone muttered. "You're tired." But I wasn't tired. Not yet. I walked slowly back through the house, our house, past framed school portraits and dusty college diplomas. I paused at a photo of my late husband, Malcolm, standing next to the boat he never quite finished. He always had big plans, Mal. He used to say, "A good life isn't made of grand gestures. It's made of small ones you don't ignore." Apparently, that wisdom skipped a generation. In the quiet of my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the blank wall where Olivia had taken down my cross-stitch frame to freshen the decor. I used to stitch words there, little phrases from books I loved. My favourite had been "Still Here." It felt like a small rebellion, but it was gone now, like so much else. That night, no one came to say goodnight. No one asked if I wanted a slice of the peach pie they served to guests. I heard them laughing past midnight. I heard the clinking of wine glasses. I heard nothing that sounded like my name, but I stayed quiet, not because I was defeated, but because silence, properly timed, is not surrender. It's strategy. The next morning, I made my bed with extra care. I folded my nightdress into the drawer like I was tucking away something sacred. Then I pulled out the old grey box from under the bed, the one with my documents, my passport, the house deed, the letter Malcolm had written before his surgery, and a small velvet pouch with the brooch my grandmother wore on her wedding day. I laid it all on the quilt and sat down with a cup of tea. My hands shook slightly, from age. Not fear. They had forgotten me. Fine. But I would not forget myself, and I would make sure they'd remember what it cost. The first time I saw the house, it was just bones and weeds. Malcolm grinned, standing in the doorway with his hands on his hips. "It's a wreck," I said. "It's a beginning," he replied. We were both 33. He had just left the army. I was working at the public library, saving every paycheck in a rusted tin labelled "Someday." That house became our someday. We painted the walls with borrowed brushes and second-hand dreams. We ate spaghetti on overturned crates until we could afford a table. I laid tile in the kitchen myself, pregnant with Olivia, and determined not to spend another winter with splinters in my heels. I remember thinking, no matter what happened, we'd built this with our own hands. Malcolm died at 62. Stroke. Quick. Cruel. I found him in the garden, still wearing those awful plaid shorts, holding a trowel like he had something left to dig. We had been married 38 years. There was no second marriage, no wild chapter, just a long, good story. After he passed, I stayed. I tended the roses. I kept his mug by the sink. Olivia visited now and then. My son, Patrick, flew in once every other year. I understood. They had lives. But slowly, the house that had once been noisy with toys and burnt toast became something quieter. Still, I never felt lonely. I had my memories, my neighbours, my garden, until the accident. 3 years ago, I slipped on the porch step, broke my hip. Olivia insisted I move in. "It's safer," she said. "You'll have company." She even cleared out the guest room. At first, I believed her. But company is not the same as belonging. Within weeks, I learned to stay small. My clock was taken down. Too loud. My doilies vanished. Too old-fashioned. She told people I liked being tucked away with my tea and audiobooks. She didn't tell them I used to host book clubs, that I'd once spoken at City Hall about literacy programs. She let me disappear in stages. I didn't fight it. Not then. I'd been raised to be grateful for what's offered, not to complain. But a house is more than walls. It's proof of effort, of history, and I still owned mine. That afternoon, 2 days after my forgotten birthday, I called Diane. She was my old neighbour, now a real estate broker. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when she answered, I heard the same warmth in her voice as ever. "Diane," I said, "how soon can you come by?" She arrived the next morning. We sat in the back seat of her car, parked 2 blocks from the house. I handed her the deed. "It's still in my name," I said. She examined it, nodded. "I want it listed quietly. No signs, no drama. Just find someone who'll love it like I did." "Are you sure, Dorothy?" I looked out at the sidewalk where Olivia's dog had chewed my hydrangeas to stubs. "I've never been more sure." Diane didn't ask questions after that. Good women don't need many words. That evening, I watched Olivia set out dinner for the family. Chicken marsala, garlic bread, a glass of Pinot. She didn't make a plate for me. I made myself toast and sat on the edge of my bed, watching the sky darken through the window. I felt something uncoil in my chest. Not joy, not revenge, just readiness. They forgot my birthday. That's fine. I'm about to give them something they'll never forget. They always assumed I had nothing of my own, that I'd handed over the reins when I moved in. Olivia even joked once, "Mum's a guest now. A permanent guest." I smiled politely, but inside I knew. Guests don't pay the property tax. After Malcolm died, I kept everything in my name. We'd written our wills together, sitting at the old kitchen table with a lawyer who charged by the hour, but cared like he didn't. We left the house to each other, with no stipulations. And when Malcolm passed, it all transferred to me, clean and clear. I never told the kids, not because I planned to hide it, but because they never asked. They assumed, and I let them. That's a mother's curse sometimes. We get used to staying quiet, even when we hold the pen. The week after my birthday, I started waking early, before the coffee machine groaned, before the TV blasted morning news. I'd sit in the dim light and go through my papers. The deed, the tax receipts, Malcolm's letter, creased and worn from rereading. "You don't have to be soft just because you're old," he had written. "Don't let them fold you into a smaller version of yourself." I didn't plan a grand reveal. No declarations, no confrontations. Just action. Simple. Steady. I called Thomas, Malcolm's old accountant, retired but still sharp as ever. He picked up on the second ring. "Dorothy Maddox," he said. "Well, I'll be. Still breathing and still smarter than the rest of us, I bet." I laughed. "Thomas, I need help. Quiet help." He didn't hesitate. I told him about the house, the papers, the plan. He asked for copies. I mailed them same day. 3 days later, we met at his home office. a converted sunroom that smelled like lemon polish and pipe tobacco. You want to transfer control of your assets into a private trust, he confirmed. Yes. And exclude your children? Yes. He nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. They think you're small, he said. But I remember. You were the one who convinced Malcolm to invest in that hardware store. You've always known your numbers. I signed the forms with hands that didn't shake. He notarized them on the spot. This trust, he said, sliding the papers into a folder, protects the house, your savings, and your pension. Upon your passing, it will go exactly where you choose. And I choose, I said, not them. He looked at me a long moment. Want to tell me why? I shook my head. They told me not to pout. He smiled sadly. That'll do it. When I returned that evening, Olivia was in the kitchen scrolling her phone, complaining about interest rates. Patrick was in the den, sipping bourbon he didn't offer me. My grandson was yelling at a video game. None of them asked where I'd been. None of them noticed the papers in my bag. They didn't see me. But that's the beauty of being underestimated. You can do almost anything, and no one stops you. The first time my grandson called me cranky, I let it pass. He was 13, his voice still unsure, testing new tones like shoes he hadn't grown into yet. He'd lost a video game and turned to me, annoyed. You're always watching weird old stuff, he muttered. You're like ancient and cranky? Olivia laughed. Not a chuckle, a full laugh, sharp and quick. Well, she is 80, she said, like that explained everything. I didn't respond. I just turned the volume down on my show and stared out the window. Outside, the garden bed I once cared for sat bare and weedy. She'd torn out my herbs last fall. Said they clashed with the landscaping. That evening, when they all went out to dinner, not a word to me, not even the courtesy of a lie, I pulled out the small navy notebook I kept under my mattress. I opened to a blank page and wrote, August 14th, called cranky and old, laughed at, no invitation to dinner. Then I flipped back to earlier entries, a few lines from March. Asked to move my rocking chair to the garage. Says it makes the living room look too retirement home. Another from May. Reminded not to hum at breakfast. Says it's grating. It wasn't the insults that broke me. It was their accumulation. Small, constant cuts. A slow bleed of dignity. Malcolm used to call me the sharpest woman he knew. Said I could spot nonsense from a mile away and slice through it with a look. But now they talked around me, over me, like I was a nuisance they'd agreed to tolerate for the tax credit. They didn't know what I was writing in that notebook. They didn't know I kept every receipt, every memory, every injustice. They didn't know I was building something. You see, it's not the grand betrayals that finally undo a woman. It's the erosion. The way love gets replaced with obligation. The way your name becomes a sigh. The way silence becomes your only answer because anything else will be dismissed as emotional. But I wasn't emotional. I was precise. The next morning, I rose early. I made pancakes, real ones, from scratch, not the microwave kind Olivia preferred. I stacked them high, buttered each layer, warmed the syrup. No one thanked me. They just ate. Afterward, as I rinsed the plates alone, I heard Olivia laughing into her phone. She gets in these moods, she said. I think it's attention-seeking, like she wants us to ask what's wrong, but honestly, I don't have time. That evening, I opened my notebook again. I wrote, cooked, cleaned, called attention-seeking, not asked a single question all day. Then I flipped to the back and underlined the list I'd been building, names of people, causes, and organizations I respected. A local women's shelter, a scholarship fund for older adult learners, the girl from the pharmacy who always called me Mrs. Maddox and asked about my day. I didn't know exactly who would receive what yet. But I knew this. Not $1 would go to people who laughed at my birthday or rolled their eyes when I opened my mouth. Because I was old. Yes. But I was not gone. And I had something left to give. Just not to them. The house had always been in my name. That fact sat quietly at the back of every conversation, like a guest no one dared acknowledge. Olivia never asked. Patrick never questioned it. They assumed that because I lived in Olivia's home now, my own had somehow ceased to be mine. But I knew better. One afternoon, while Olivia and the boys were out, I pulled the small step stool from the closet and climbed, carefully, to reach the lockbox I kept at the top of my wardrobe. It was metal, dented on the corner from some move years ago, but the key still turned smoothly. Inside were the papers no one thought I still had. The original deed from 1971, tax filings, all current, the insurance certificate, a copy of Malcolm's will, notarized and still smelling faintly of the drawer it had lived in all these years, cedar and time. I laid everything out on the bed like cards in a game only I knew the rules to. There it was, in black and white. Dorothy Louise Maddox, sole owner, with no encumbrances, no liens, no claims. I was not just a former homeowner, I was the homeowner. A small, unexpected tear slid down my cheek, not from sadness, from something sharper. Relief, perhaps. Or maybe it was the feeling of standing on solid ground again after years of being politely shuffled to the side. That same night, I sat at the dining table long after the rest had gone to bed. I placed a fresh page in my notebook and wrote, "Confirmed ownership. Everything still mine. Nobody asked. Nobody noticed." The next morning, Olivia mentioned something offhand while scrolling on her phone. "You know, if you'd just sign over that house, we could refinance it and make the down payment on a second property. It'd be an investment for the family." The family. She said it like I wasn't part of it. I looked up from my tea. "You mean my house?" She blinked, then smiled, the condescending kind. "Of course, but it's not like you're using it." "I'm not using it," I said slowly. "Yet." That word hung in the air for a beat too long. Olivia changed the subject. Later that day, I made copies of every document and sealed them in a manila envelope. I labeled it in thick black ink, in case they try to claim otherwise. Because I'd seen the way people rewrite stories. They start with, "We helped her," and end with, "She owed us." But I didn't owe them anything. I had paid in full. With labor, with patience, with silence. That night, as I turned off the light and settled under the quilt, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning above me, the same one Olivia had said was outdated. So was I, apparently. But I was still here, still spinning, still sharp enough to know what was mine. They'd forgotten my birthday. That was one mistake. Forgetting who they were talking to? That would be the second. I hadn't seen Peter Salinger in nearly 20 years. He'd been Malcolm's attorney, back when we still argued about curtain colours and retirement accounts. He wore suspenders before they were stylish again, had a voice like slow gravel, and treated paperwork like gospel. Malcolm trusted him with everything. So did I. I found his number tucked in the back of Malcolm's notebook, right where he used to jot down quotes and grocery lists. "Call Peter if anything goes sideways," he'd scribbled once, next to a recipe for lemon scones. I called that Thursday morning. "Peter Salinger," the voice answered, deep and unmistakable. "Peter," I said. "It's Dorothy, Dorothy Maddox." A pause. "Well now, there's a name from the good years. Dorothy, how are you?" "I'm 80, I said plainly, "and I'm ready." He didn't laugh. He didn't ask for explanations. He just said, "Come in tomorrow at 10. Bring the papers." When I arrived at his office, a narrow, wood-panelled suite above a used bookstore, he stood to greet me like no time had passed. "Still upright," he said. "That's half the battle." We sat across from each other, steaming mugs between us. I slid the envelope across the desk. "I want everything put into an irrevocable trust," I said. "I'm the sole trustee while I'm alive. When I pass, it goes exactly where I name it to go. No loopholes, no challenges." Peter flipped through the documents with a slow, reverent eye. "This deed's clean. Titles in perfect order. You've kept everything current." "Malcolm raised me right," I said. He smiled. "And who are the beneficiaries?" I handed him a handwritten list. He scanned it silently. The first name, not Olivia, not Patrick, but Good Roots Women's Housing Project. Then a literacy fund, a neighbour's daughter with special needs, a part-time librarian who once picked up my dropped groceries in the rain. "No family?" he asked softly. "No," I said. "They forgot me when I was still breathing. I won't reward them for it when I'm not." Peter looked up. His eyes were the same steel grey I remembered. "You know they'll come for it anyway." "Let them," I said. "The law won't be on their side, and I won't be here to listen." He nodded once. "You want the will updated too?" "Yes. Explicitly state they're excluded. No ambiguities. I want the language ironclad." He began drafting that day. His assistant printed forms on thick paper with embossed headers. I signed each one slowly, clearly, my hand steady as ever. He notarized them immediately. "It's done," he said. "If they try to contest it, we'll bury them in paperwork." "I don't want vengeance," I said. "I want clarity." Peter leaned back in his chair. "Dorothy," he said, "this is the most peaceful war I've ever seen." I left the office lighter than I'd arrived. That evening, Olivia noticed something different. She stood in my doorway, arms crossed, scanning my face. "You've been out a lot lately," she said. "I like fresh air," I replied. She narrowed her eyes. "You're not making plans or anything?" I looked her in the face. "You mean the kind of plans a cranky old woman might make?" She flushed slightly. "That was just a joke." "It's fine," I interrupted. "I have a good sense of humor. I just prefer it when jokes aren't directed at the only person doing your laundry." She didn't answer, just hovered, like she expected an apology I didn't offer. That night, I sat in bed and updated my notebook. Legal transfer complete. Trust established. Family excluded. Not out of spite, out of preservation. I closed the book and placed it gently back in its drawer. They'd called me a freeloader, a burden, too emotional, too sensitive, too old. But what they forgot, what they never truly saw, was that I had been building something in the quiet. And now it was solid, finished, and entirely mine. The will was finalized the following week. Peter called me himself. "It's signed, sealed, and filed," he said. "No room for interpretation. No room for argument." I thanked him and then sat in the park for over an hour. Just sat. Watching a mother push her child on the swing, listening to the rustle of dry leaves, letting the quiet settle in my bones. That night, I made soup, the kind Olivia didn't like, with too much garlic and fresh dill. I didn't ask. I didn't apologize. I made what I wanted. When she came in from yoga, she sniffed the air and wrinkled her nose. "Couldn't you just make something neutral for once?" I ladled a bowl for myself, carried it to my room, and shut the door. I was done being neutral. Inside my room, I took the list from Peter's office and reread the names I'd chosen as beneficiaries. Some of them I barely knew. Women I'd met once, but remembered. A cashier who held my arm as I stepped off a curb. A young woman from church who helped me download an audiobook. Not because I was family, not because they had to, just because they were kind. They would get something. Olivia would not. That decision didn't come from rage. It came from inventory. I'd taken stock, not just of my finances, but of every birthday missed, every meal eaten without thanks, every insult tossed casually over a shoulder. They hadn't been cruel, not deliberately. That's what made it worse. It wasn't malice, it was disregard. And disregard is harder to forgive. I didn't announce my plans. I didn't make a scene. But I did begin to prepare. I called a moving company. Quietly. Scheduled a day. A week out. When I spoke to Diane, she had already begun showing the house, my house, to prospective buyers. She knew to do it quietly. No lawn signs, no open houses, just serious inquiries only. "It's got charm," she told me. "I've got people interested already." "Good," I said. "I want it gone before they know what they had." By then, I had moved the most important things to a storage unit downtown. I rented it under my maiden name, the wedding album, Malcolm's cufflinks, the brooch, a few books, my sewing kit. Olivia didn't notice. Patrick didn't ask. And when I started sleeping with my purse zipped and locked, no one found that odd either. The night before I left, Olivia had guests over. Wine, tapas, music too loud for a Tuesday. I wasn't invited. I stayed in my room, flipping through an old photo album. Patrick as a boy, grinning with a lost front tooth. Olivia, arms wrapped around her first dog, before ambition tightened her smile. I closed the book and packed it into my suitcase. One last entry in the notebook that night. Everything's in place. They will wake up in a world where they inherit nothing, and they'll wonder how they missed the signs. The answer will be simple. They weren't looking. At 5:30 the next morning, I slipped out the front door without making a sound. The moving truck was already idling at the curb. The driver, a kind man named Emery, lifted my suitcase into the cab and asked, "You sure you want to do this alone, Mom?" I smiled. "Emery, I've done far harder things with far less help." He tipped his cap. We pulled away slowly. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Olivia's rose bushes wilted from neglect. The paint on the shutters had chipped. The wind chime Malcolm hung 30 years ago still tinkled weakly in the breeze. They wouldn't even notice I was gone until dinner. And by then, the keys would already be in Diane's hands, the trust documents locked in Peter's filing cabinet, and every single asset I once shared reassigned. I wasn't running. I was closing a door that had been creaking on its hinges for far too long. I waited 3 full days before answering Olivia's first call. When I finally picked up, her voice cracked from the start. "Where are you?" "Safe," I said. "What do you mean safe? You disappeared. You didn't leave a note." "I left your laundry folded. I figured that was note enough." There was a pause. Long enough for her to realize this conversation wasn't going to end with her getting her way. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You could have at least talked to us." "Talked?" I repeated. "Like you talked to me on my birthday?" Another pause, this one sharper. "I told you we'd celebrate later," she snapped, but her voice softened halfway through. "Mom, come home. You're not thinking clearly." "No, dear," I said. "For the first time in years, I am." I hung up without another word. After that, the calls came like clockwork. Patrick, Olivia, her husband, even my grandson. A text from him read, "Hey, sorry if I said something dumb. Can we talk?" I didn't reply. Meanwhile, Diane moved quickly. Within a week, the house had 2 solid offers, both above asking. One was from a young couple expecting twins, the other from a retired teacher who wanted to start a foster home. I chose the teacher. Something about the idea of that house filled again with life, with the voices of children, with someone who knew how to listen. It gave me a peace no apology from Olivia could offer. The day I signed the final documents, I did so from a clean, sunlit apartment overlooking a community garden. The window was open, the air smelled of mint and cut grass. I wore Malcolm's old cardigan, the one with a frayed elbow I never let anyone fix. Diane called me after closing. "It's official. They've wired the funds. Transfer's complete." I didn't cry, but I did laugh, quietly. That kind of laugh that comes not from humor, but from relief. I poured myself a glass of lemonade and sat in the soft chair by the window. I looked out at the lavender growing wild below and whispered, "We did it, Mal." At 8:42 p.m. that night, Olivia called again. I let it ring. Then Patrick. Then a text from Olivia. "You sold the house? Without telling us?" "That's ours, Mum. You had no right." I didn't answer. Instead, I took out my notebook and wrote, "Sold. No regrets. They called it ours, but never acted like it was mine." The next morning, Peter called to say he'd received an email from Olivia's husband, something between a threat and a plea. "She's grasping," he said. "Don't worry. It's ironclad." "Let them grasp," I said. They never learned to hold what mattered. I spent the rest of the day arranging furniture in my new space. A real kitchen table, shelves with my books, a teapot that whistled like the one we had in '74. Around dinner time, I received a voicemail from Olivia. "You've lost it. You've really lost it. This is insane. You're punishing us over nothing. This family, this legacy, it was supposed to be ours." Legacy. She said it like she'd earned it. But legacies aren't inherited like heirlooms. They're earned through presence, through care, through simple human respect. What Olivia never understood was that I would have given her everything: the house, the money, the memory of Malcolm's laughter echoing in the garden, if she'd simply remembered my name with tenderness. Instead, she remembered it only when it was convenient. But that window had closed, quietly, completely. And this new one, framed by morning light and wild herbs, was open. Open to fresh air, to warm tea, to peace. The new apartment wasn't large, but it was mine. A third-floor walk-up with creaky stairs, faded wallpaper, and a kitchen window that caught the morning sun just right. There was a garden downstairs, not much more than a patch of soil ringed by chain link. But I planted mint and chamomile anyway. I hadn't gardened in years. It felt good to get dirt under my fingernails again. Malcolm would have laughed. "You always said you hated the mess," he used to say. I did. But I loved the peace of watching something grow. No one told me what I could or couldn't plant here. No one commented on the smell of garlic or asked me to turn down the radio. I could hum if I wanted to. I could sleep in or rise early and sit by the window in silence. My time belonged to me again. The first week passed quietly. I made friends with a woman named Marcia who lived across the hall. She'd been a nurse, retired now, living with 2 cats and a steel will that reminded me of my own. We shared tea in the evenings. She didn't ask many questions. She just listened when I needed to talk and laughed when I made a dry joke about aging knees and selfish children. "You're sharper than most knives I've met," she told me once. "I wouldn't want to cross you." "You'd have to try pretty hard," I replied. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. But I didn't need to. She understood the language of women who'd been useful once, and then forgotten. Diane kept me updated. The teacher who bought my house had moved in with her niece. They'd already started repainting the kitchen. Lavender, apparently. I smiled at that. I'd always wanted to paint it lavender. Olivia had called the idea dated. I didn't miss that house, not anymore. The house I loved had ended when Malcolm did. What came after had only been walls and cold floors. Now, in this small, sunlit place, I felt warmth again. Peter sent me the final bank transfer. The trust was fully funded, everything secured. I watched the numbers appear on my screen with quiet satisfaction. Enough for comfort. Enough to choose what I wanted next. I spent a little. A comfortable chair, a decent kettle, new shoes that didn't pinch. I mailed a check to the local library in Malcolm's name, with a note that read, "For the kids who still believe in stories," and I made another donation, to the women's housing project I'd listed in my will. A little early, just to see their faces when the envelope arrived. I never signed it with my full name, just DLM, in memory of someone who was once overlooked and remembered it. Olivia's calls slowed after the first week. One a day, then every other. By week's end, just a message. "You're being unreasonable. We're family. We could have worked something out." But they only want to work something out after they realize the door is closed. I brewed my tea and watched the clouds roll over the city. No one called me ancient. No one told me to eat in my room. No one reminded me of what I was costing them. And for the first time in decades, I breathed in without apology. This was my second breath. My second chapter. Mine. You learn a lot about peace when you stop asking for permission to exist. The mornings came slow and quiet now. I would wake with the soft ache of joints that had served me for 8 years, sit up slowly, pull my shawl tight, and walk barefoot to the window. The light poured in differently here. Not brighter, just softer, like it didn't expect anything from me. I'd make oatmeal with too much cinnamon, just the way Malcolm hated and I loved. No one wrinkled their nose. No one rolled their eyes. I didn't eat quickly, as if I had to get out of the way. I sat at my own table, by my own plant, with my own thoughts. That is a kind of freedom no child can give you, only take away. Marcia knocked most afternoons. She brought butter cookies and stories from her old job. Some of them were sad. Some made me laugh so hard I nearly spilled tea. She never once asked why I moved. I think she recognized the silence in me, the kind that isn't born from shyness, but from years of being talked over. We became a pair, in our way. Two older women with firm opinions and soft hearts, sharing space without crowding it. One day, she brought over a jigsaw puzzle, the kind with 2,000 pieces and a watercolor scene of a fishing village. We started it on my coffee table. "I like puzzles," she said. "They don't ask questions. Just let you fix things quietly." I smiled. That's the best kind of fixing. I hadn't been touched by anger in days, and that was the biggest surprise of all. I thought I'd feel vindicated, triumphant, like I'd won some long war. But all I felt was calm, and a little sorry, not for what I'd done, but for how long I'd waited to do it. They could have had me, you know. My children, my grandson. They could have had the house, the stories, the memories. I would have given them everything freely if they had only looked at me with love instead of obligation. Instead, they stared through me, spoke around me, laughed while I washed their dishes. I wasn't angry. I was simply done. Diane called to let me know the buyers were settling in well. The woman had written a note if I wanted it. I said yes. It arrived on crisp stationery, in the kind of handwriting you don't see anymore. "Dear Mrs. Maddox," it read, "this house feels like love." I don't know your story, but I feel it in the walls. Thank you for giving us a place to start our next chapter. With respect and gratitude, E.M. Foster. I folded the letter and placed it between the pages of Malcolm's notebook. He would have liked her. She sounded kind. That evening, I sat on the balcony and watched the lights bloom across the city. They shimmered like thoughts too tender to say out loud. My phone buzzed once. Olivia again. I didn't look. Instead, I picked up my pen and wrote in the notebook. 10 days into my own life. No one's helper. No one's background. Just me. I wasn't lonely. I was alone. And there's a difference. Alone is quiet. Lonely is invisible. And I was no longer invisible. The official notice went out on a Wednesday morning. A courier delivered it to Olivia's doorstep, along with the legal documentation bearing the county seal and Peter's signature. Inside was the irrevocable declaration. The property had been sold, transferred, and fully paid for. No reversals, no appeals, no room for questions. Attached was a second envelope, a formal tenancy termination notice. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. No arguments, no pleading. The new owner had rights. And now, so did I. At 9:04 a.m., Olivia called. She didn't leave a voicemail. She just called again. Then Patrick. Then Olivia again. By lunchtime, I had 16 missed calls and 3 text messages. What is this? You can't do this. This is our house. You left it to us. You said... I had never said. That was the thing about people like Olivia. They mistake silence for consent, assume kindness is a blank check. But this time, the account was closed. Peter called to confirm they'd reached out. You've caused quite a stir, he said, voice tinged with something that sounded a bit like admiration. They're scrambling? I replied. That's not the same as grieving. He chuckled. You always did play the long game. That evening, I made tea and sat in the dark with only the city's hum for company. Marcia knocked, but I didn't answer. I needed that night to myself, to feel what I felt, which wasn't triumph or bitterness. It was finality, a long, soft exhale. I wrote in my notebook, the house is no longer mine, but neither is the burden. At 11:17 p.m., Olivia left her first voicemail. Mum, this isn't you. You're not like this. Are you sick? Is someone influencing you? I listened to it twice, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember how she sounded when she realized she didn't know me anymore. She'd built an entire version of me in her head, pliable, grateful, quiet. A version that folded towels, said thank you when dismissed, and quietly disappeared into the background. She didn't know the woman who paid the taxes. She didn't know the woman who signed the checks. She didn't know the woman who stayed awake at night documenting every moment she was made to feel small. And that woman? She had finally stopped asking for permission to matter. By Friday, the neighbours had started to notice. Word spread the way it always does, through hedges and mailboxes and the soft creak of idle curiosity. Someone asked Olivia on the sidewalk, "Are you moving?" She said too quickly, "Just transitioning, downsizing." But I'm sure her face betrayed her. Panic has a way of wearing even the best lipstick thin. By Saturday, I'd received an email from my grandson. It read, I don't really get what's happening, but if I said something that hurt you, I'm sorry. I was just being a dumb kid. It was the closest anyone had come to apology. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I had already replied, with documents, with signatures, with a clean transfer of power. They had ignored my birthday. Now they would remember every day that followed. Sunday afternoon, I heard a knock at the front door of my new apartment. Not the buzzer downstairs. A physical knock. That meant someone had gotten in behind another tenant or had been let up by mistake. I moved slowly, carefully. It was my grandson. No hoodie, no earbuds, no swagger. Just a boy, a tall one now, standing with his shoulders slumped and a duffel bag at his feet. "Hi, Grandma," he said. His voice was lower than I remembered, quieter. I didn't open the door all the way. Just stood there, hand on the frame. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. "Mum's kind of losing it. Dad's staying at a motel. Everything's gone sideways." I didn't answer. I didn't think you'd really do it," he continued. "They always said you were, like, too soft. But I guess you're not." Still, I didn't move. Then, almost as a whisper, "You really sold it, huh? The house?" "Yes," I said, finally. He swallowed. "Why?" I studied his face. There was something honest there. Not regret, exactly, but exposure. The look of someone who'd finally realized the adults in his life had been living in a story that wasn't theirs to narrate. "Because I was invisible in that house," I said. "And I'm not invisible anymore." He nodded, slowly, looked down at his shoes. "I shouldn't have called you cranky." "No," I said. "You shouldn't have." He looked up again. "But you didn't even tell us. You just vanished." "No," I corrected gently. "I left. And there's a difference." For a moment, the air between us held something fragile. "I just wanted to say sorry," he said, "even if it's too late." I studied him, not the boy he was, not the grandson I used to feed scrambled eggs and orange juice, but the young man standing in front of me, a boy trying to become better, or maybe just trying to survive the mess left behind. "You're not the one who made me feel small," I said, "but you watched them do it. And that matters too." He nodded. "Are you staying with your father?" I asked. "For now. I don't know. Everything's weird." "You'll figure it out." He took a breath. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside, just enough for him to cross the threshold. Not into forgiveness, but into understanding. He looked around the apartment. "This is nice," he said. "Smells like tea and peace." I almost smiled. He sat on the edge of the couch, awkward in his own skin. "I don't know what happens next, for any of us." "I do," I said. "You learn, you grow, and you remember what it feels like to be on the outside looking in." He nodded again. "Thanks for not slamming the door." "I didn't say I'd leave it open forever," I replied, "but I didn't slam it." He stood up. "I'll go. I wanted to see you. I wanted to say it." "You did." As he stepped into the hallway, he turned once more. "Can I visit sometime?" "Not until you understand why you'd want to." He nodded, didn't argue. That night, I wrote, "First apology. Soft, hesitant, real. Not enough, but a beginning. That boy may still learn." I folded the page into the back of my notebook, and then I boiled water, brewed tea, and sat in the dark. Alone, but not cold, not broken. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt still. And stillness, I'd learned, was a power all its own. The days became steady again, calm, predictable in the way I had longed for, not because nothing happened, but because nothing hurt. Mornings were for tea and puzzle pieces. Afternoons sometimes brought a visit from Marcia, or a walk around the block with my canvas tote and too many coupons. Evenings, I read. Not out loud. No one here expected to be entertained. I read for myself. The phone still rang now and then. Olivia, Patrick, even her husband once. But the rings no longer rattled me. I let them echo into silence. Marcia asked one day, "You ever gonna call them back?" I smiled without bitterness. They didn't call me for years, even when I lived under their roof. I figure I'm just returning the favor. She cackled. That's cold. It's precise. That week, a letter arrived from the teacher who had bought my old house. I had forgotten Diane must have passed her my forwarding address. Dear Mrs. Maddox, I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted to thank you again. I don't know what you went through, but this house, it's healing me. Every room has light. Every window opens. We painted the bedrooms sage green and planted tomatoes in your old garden bed. They're already blooming. You left behind something good. I just wanted you to know someone noticed. Warmly, Eloise Foster. I folded the letter and placed it next to the first one. Then I made a cup of tea and stepped onto the balcony, where the mint had grown full and fragrant. I crushed a leaf between my fingers and breathed it in, just like Malcolm used to. I hadn't spoken his name aloud in weeks, but that day I whispered it, like a prayer. Mal, they finally saw me, just not the ones who were supposed to. Later, Marcia brought over her tax forms and a mess of envelopes. Can you help me figure this out? She asked. These numbers confuse me. I helped, slowly, patiently, because that's what I do. That's who I've always been. And this time, no one called it a burden. She brought me soup the next day. Not a thank you, she said, just lunch. In the quiet of my room that evening, I flipped through my notebook again. I'd filled nearly every page. Some lines were sharp, some sad, some proud, but none of them were sorry. I added one final line to the last page. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence was just the sound of me sharpening my spine. And then I closed the book. Not because the story was over, but because I was no longer living in their version of it. It was a Thursday, quiet, grey, with a breeze that carried the scent of wet stone and something faintly sweet, like early roses. I sat on my balcony with a chipped teacup in hand, watching the clouds move as if they had nowhere urgent to be. My mint plant had outgrown its pot. I needed to replant it soon. I liked that, things growing beyond their containers. Marcia had gone to visit her sister. The building was still, and so was I. My phone buzzed again. Olivia? No voicemail? Just her name, glowing on the screen like a warning. I didn't answer. She had called 57 times in total. I had counted, not out of pettiness, but precision. The woman who forgot my birthday had found my number again when there was something to lose. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt full. And that is a far more satisfying thing. The apartment smelled of lemon soap and old paperbacks. I had arranged the bookshelf by memory. Fiction on top, poetry on the bottom, Malcolm's dusty biographies in the middle. A photograph of us on the front porch, me younger, in a blue dress he loved, sat in a simple wooden frame beside my tea. I reached for my notebook, opened the inside cover, and reread the words I'd written months before. They ignored my 80th birthday, mocked me for being hurt, so I made sure they'd never inherit a dime. But that wasn't the real story. Not entirely. The real story wasn't about the money, or the house, or even the betrayal. It was about what happens when a woman who has given everything, time, labor, love, finally gives something to herself. It was about ending the cycle of polite silence that generations of mothers had swallowed like stone. It was about dignity, and how you don't always need to raise your voice to claim it. You just have to stop handing it over. At 4:12 p.m., the intercom buzzed. I checked the camera. Olivia. Her hair was unkempt, her lipstick too bright for daylight. She looked up, not at the lens, but at the sky. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with the tone of someone who had run out of performances. Mum, she said, please. I didn't answer. She waited 10 minutes, then 20. Eventually, she walked away, not angry, not slamming anything, just walking. Later that night, I sat with the window open and watched the lights flicker across the city. The wind made the curtains dance. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I wrote one last line in my notebook. The loudest thing I ever said was done in complete silence. And if you've read this far, if you've ever sat alone on your birthday, or been told to stop pouting when your heart was cracked open, or folded someone else's laundry while they forgot your name, then maybe you understand. Maybe you're sitting quietly too. Maybe you've swallowed years of being overlooked because you thought that was loyalty. Let me say this. It is never too late to remember who you are. It is never too late to claim your own name. It is never too late to speak, even if you do it by walking away. If this story echoes something inside you, if you've ever been mistaken for furniture, if you've ever been too kind for too long, then you are not alone. And if you want more stories like this, from women who didn't shout, but who remembered, then subscribe to Grandma's Untold Stories. Because here, we don't beg. We remember. And sometimes we rebuild.